Welcome to the Gruber Morning Show. I'm Pete Gruber.
I'm Mark Schaffner. Good morning.
And we have Mike Manning with us today.
Tesla Roadster podcast.
Tesla Roadster podcast. Thank you. We don't have our screen there with background. Is that going to be there today? Okay. So just want to make sure everything is working. We're streaming on a number of platforms, and hopefully all of them are live. But Mike is joining us today, and he works at Gruber Motor Company. He is our suspension expert, and there aren't too many Tesla Roadsters that show up these days without suspension problems, except for that one I drove this morning. Remember I was telling you?
Yep.
I'm driving along, and this thing feels like we had just changed shocks on it, and we hadn't. So I looked down at the speedometer, and it said 3280. That was it. That was the mileage on that car.
Wow.
But yeah, you get up over 20,000 miles. Some of them are up to 80 to 100,000, and they ride like dump trucks. So we're doing a lot of work there. So Mike has made some major progress with some of the suspension components, and maybe before we get into that, you can tell us a bit about your background.
My background, I came from McLaren. I worked at a few dealerships, and basically McLaren certified technician, electrical and suspension, parts management as well. And then before that, I worked for a lot of the major OEMs and did durability engineering, vehicle testing at the proving grounds at several across the United States.
Okay, all right. Excellent credentials. But we knew that. I just wanted you to tell the audience here.
Yep.
And for those of you wondering what that crazy backdrop is that we have, because normally we put up a car, we put a Tesla Roadster up there. Today I asked AI, give me a bunch of suspension components on a backdrop with a white background. And that's what it created. Now, if you look closely, those of you that understand suspension components, none of this makes any sense. They look like suspension components, but there's nothing real there.
Yeah.
The ball joints, some of the other linkages may be close to what you would expect, but it's pretty cool what AI hallucinates and will create based on a prompt, right?
Hallucinates. That's a good word for it.
So we've got our first question. YouTube, RC Robinson-San, he upvoted us. Well, thank you. Appreciate that.
In YouTube terms, that means he liked it. So everyone who's watching, go ahead and drop a like. Don't forget.
Understand, yes.
Thanks, Richard.
Thank you. So one of the things that I thought we could start with here, Mike, is you had done some work with these guys right here. Tell us what's going on here.
So these are the mounting plates. They mount the upper shock to the chassis.
Yes.
And what's happening is basically this is the lower mount that mounts to the lower control arm. This mounts up at the top, and then it cradles across like this right here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Everyone can see.
Bolt
And
goes
the
through
bolt
there.
goes through and locks it into place.
All right, we won't bolt it down here, but you get the idea, right?
Yep. So what's happening is we're replacing shocks or doing our walk-arounds of the vehicles for inspections on the vehicles that come in, is we're finding that the bolts that hold this to the chassis are actually loose and causing it to walk around a little bit. And so when it's doing that, we're getting sometimes a little bit of contact between the body of the original shocks and the actual mount itself. And so we're coming up with a solution. We're going to change these bolts out to a grade 10 bolt and add a shoulder to it so that it helps lock these into place so that we get less movement back and forth on it.
And so what we're saying here is that the Roadsters that are coming in, up to 15 years old, are coming in with loose hardware. We really don't think that was at the time of the installation or the time of production. It happened over time.
Yeah, it's happening over time.
And what would you say the reason for that is?
It could be the compression of the material. It could be just age of the bolt stretch that happens as well over some time.
And that's the reason you're going to a 10 grade bolt, which is a hardened bolt compared
Yes.
to the softer ones that may have stretched over the years.
Yes, so we're going to upgrade the hardware, and then also adding the shoulder on here will stop the chance of stretch and having a stress riser.
Oh, I see.
bolt.
Oh, okay.
And then you can kind of see, I'm not sure out there, people can see where because of the brackets moving, we're getting starting to ovalize in the bracket.
So with that hole becoming oval, That, of course, compounds the problem because now the shock itself is beginning
Yeah,
to
the
bounce
actual
up and
bolt
down.
is moving inside the bracket now.
Right. And as it's doing that, it's making that hole even more oblong.
Yep.
Okay.
And that can also translate into road vibration being felt through the steering.
Hmm.
So because this basically goes down to the control arm, so you'll start feeling it sometimes in the steering.
Okay. And we're going to get into shocks in this discussion because this Roadster session was actually specially designed for a suspension discussion, and that's how we advertise it on Facebook and other social media sites. But before I get heavily into shocks, I want to describe to the audience where we got our shocks from. We've always repaired shocks on the Roadsters. We used to rebuild them, the original Bilsteins. And, that only gets you so far, it seems like. Although we have an excellent rebuilder, he does Lamborghini shocks. In fact, Lamborghini sends him shocks from all over the world to rebuild.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So he's definitely, he has some expertise, and I've known him for 30 years, and he's been doing it for 30 years. So we knew we had a good rebuilder, and he's got all kinds of special equipment, tooling. He's even got a shock dyno, which allows him to, dial in precisely the spring dampening and rates and all that. All of the stuff that he built himself, by the way. And for those of you interested, we have a video on our YouTube channel, and it's called Roadster Shocks or something like that, where we actually take you on a tour through Jeff's shop, how he rebuilds these shocks. But we decided a year or so ago that we really would like to have a new option as well. And of course, the original Bilstein product is no longer available. They stopped production in, 2008, 2009, when the Roadster project basically ended. And the original people that were involved in the Bilstein project are gone and retired. We did find one retired guy. And he said, I'm going to try to help you guys get some specs for these original shocks so that you can get them recreated. And the 4 shock companies that we looked at to build or recreate the Tesla Roadster shocks were Penske, Bilstein, Olin, and Monroe. And eventually we found a company that has been making Roadster shocks for 5 years, but that came later. Now, you have to remember that when you go to any of these companies and you try to get them to recreate a product that has been obsolete or no longer in production, and the first thing they ask you is, well, how many thousands do you want to buy? And when you say 20 sets, 50 sets, they kind of laugh at you and say, okay, but then they give you a price, which is just unbearable because of all the setup time and the engineering time they have to fold into it. So where we lucked out was 4 of those vendors that I mentioned were going to start from scratch. Like even Penske, they make a custom shock for the Roadster, but the cost is extremely high. So by finding eventually Intrax in the Netherlands, who had been making these shocks for 5 years, we were able to get the price to a reasonable level. Now, our online price is just under $3,000 for a complete set. Even that seems high when you look at traditional shocks. You can go to AutoZone and buy shocks for your Ford Mustang, much less than that.
Oh, yeah. $100 a shock or something like that or less.
Yeah. So that's the backstory on how we eventually ended up with an Intrax shock. And then, the other thing about Intrax is how long have they been in the shock business? And that was important to us because we don't want a fly-by-night new company that's going to struggle, that may not be around, that may not make it financially. Well, they've been building shocks for 50 years for the racing industry, so we know we've got a solid vendor. So anyway, that's the backstory on the eventual selection that we made. And Mike, at this point, maybe you can tell us how we're making even further improvements to the Tesla Roadster shocks that they're making for us.
So further improvements. So we're going to make a change to the front. So we have a shock that's mounted. It's can fit left or right. So we have found with Bilstein, the other ones, when we mount the reservoir onto the chassis, it sends this reservoir line out and it rubs on the control arm. And so we're worried about the abrasion rubbing a hole through this. This contains oil pressurized, and when the shock is moving up and down, it generates heat. And so having the reservoir filled with the oil helps keep the dampening characteristics consistent across the range, even in hot weather, cold weather. If you're on a bumpy road or dirt road, it's good to have these built in, because what it does is it keeps the dampening within the temperature range, so it's a consistent road feel. So what's happening is we're finding on the OEMs is they went and left the brake line, or left the line hitting the control arm, and they've just put a piece of trim on the sharp part to keep it from rubbing through. So
to keep it from rubbing through the braided portion of this hose.
yes. So what we've done is we're going to change the top of these into a threaded portion that we're able to rotate.
Hang on just a second. Hey, Jesse, can you bring up picture banjo adjustment eyelet? And what we're going to show you is what the engineers at Intrax sent us a few days ago, showing a further improvement or modification, which is what Mike is talking about. We had figured out that if we were able to orient this a few degrees either left or right, it would no longer hit the control arm.
Yes.
And but now you end up with a custom right and a custom left shock because it's on one side or the other. They came up with a brilliant idea to make it universal so that it'll fit on the left or right of the front of the Roadster by putting, maybe you can describe it.
So it's a eyelet, I guess is the best way to explain it. And so it's threaded, where you can see the arrows at. There's a nut that's on there, and it allows you to rotate the shock, but also keep the mount centered with the chassis. And so by allowing us to rotate it a few degrees, it's going to put this line more towards the inboard of the chassis and not rubbing up against the upper control.
Out of harm's way. Yep. Exactly. Okay.
Hey, one second, Pete. I'm going to switch over to your close-up so you can get a little closer view, but I got to add
Okay.
the
We're
extra
gonna get
mic.
a closer view of that banjo eyelet. Cool. And you know, I'm the designated Tesla Roadster test driver. So I drive about 2 to 3 Roadsters per week. As these guys repair them, I test drive for a few days, alternate charge discharge cycles, the whole scenario. And I've lived in my house for over 40 years, so I always take the same road. I know every pothole, every split, every seam, every transition from asphalt to concrete, and how the cars respond. And I am amazed at the performance that we get out of these Intrax shocks. Now, we do dial them in. There's an adjustment there. Maybe you can talk a bit about that.
So we have adjustment for spring preload, which is these collars right here. These are tight. So we set these at a specific spring rate. And the way it works is we want to put the spring under a certain amount of tension. It's going to keep the weight of the vehicle. But through the vibrations down the road and the imperfections that you experience going down the road, it causes the spring to oscillate. And when it oscillates, we then need to have the adjustment clickers on the bottom. These shocks come with the 50 clicks, and we start from fully closed and then back them out. It changes the valving inside the dampening rod to control the spring and how it functions. So when we started making adjustments on here, I drove the vehicle and said, oh, we can make some adjustments. So we went in without telling Pete. We made a couple adjustments of dampening rod, sent them out, and then he came back and reported back what he felt.
Yeah, and like I said, this thing drives like a Cadillac. I've never had a Roadster this smooth before and this responsive. You know, lack of bump steer, you know, cornering was top notch. And yeah, very impressed with these shocks. By the way, one other thing to mention here, this set of shocks that we get from Intrax are the equivalent of the upgraded suspension shocks that were put in Roadsters in the Roadster Sports. So this is the more expensive version than you would normally have gotten with a base Roadster. All right.
We have a couple of questions here in comments. First, YouTube Bromans says, Philly in the building. So good morning and glad to have you here. And then on Instagram, OTReb06 says, which engineering fields will grow in the next few years?
EV repair.
Software engineering.
Electrical.
Yeah.
Software engineering. Yes, you bet.
Software engineering, electrical, EV repair. So a lot of the engineering fields will continue to grow in the next few years, honestly.
And we get asked this question all the time. I'm a young guy. I want to get an education, and I'd love to work on EVs. What kind of education should I get? And of course, the options are, Universal Technical Institute, learning mechanical stuff. And our advice is, go get yourself an engineering degree at ASU.
Yeah.
Learn about the electronics. You can always pick up the mechanical stuff as you're working on it, or your employer may fund that. But in the meantime, you're going to have a far broader range of skills if you understand components, CAN signals, software, even Linux, and you're able to actually do a deep dive into the electronics on these cars. Even though they look like cars, and I make this point all the time, 4 tires and a cabin and all that and a steering wheel, they're not. They're distinctly different. Those drivetrains do not have anything in common with each other.
Exactly. They're much more like computers on wheels,
Right.
With an integrated 100 kilowatt power source.
Right.
Highlander on YouTube also has joined us again today. Good morning, Highlander. First, it says we were making Tesla Bilstein in Hamilton, Ohio, in 2014. I'm sorry, that's Hamilton, Ontario, I think.
Ontario, yeah. I think
That's
so.
when I was there. Didn't seem to take off though.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that's right. There's a Bilstein location in the U.S. or Canada, North America. Instagram, Satyender_Atri. He says, good. Right. Thank you. YouTube, Broman says, electrical, do you have any suggestions for a wiring harness protection? I have gone through 3 wiring harness repairs from Tesla, and it has totaled at least $1,000. I park on the street. I think what you're probably talking about is that wiring harness that comes from the door to the firewall. And every time you open the door, it's like an accordion. It, flattens out and then coils again.
Yes.
And we have noticed wire breakage. A better way to do it, probably a sleeve around that, I would say.
Yeah, a sleeve. I would take a look and see if actually the wiring is short, because if it's too short, when you close the door or open the door, it can stretch the wire. And it could be breaking just because the wiring is too short. So if it's that case, maybe pull the wire. If you can get behind there and pull it through so you have a little bit of slack in there,
Right.
That may be an issue. Or if there's too much slack, it could be pinching. But without actually seeing it in front of me and being able to on that.
The ones that I've seen didn't seem to have a sufficient strand count wire, which makes it more flexible, of course. Think of this. If you use solid core wire like they do in the electrical world and conduit, you're probably going to open and close that door 10 times and it's going to break.
Yeah.
So a high strand count, flexible, like a welding cable. You've got thousands of little wires in that welding cable, but it's extremely flexible. And then Rodent Issue Bromance from YouTube says, we've seen that as well.
Yes, we have seen some, pest deterrent sprays and stuff like that tend to be really effective. Do you still have the one over there, Pete? Yeah, we had, I believe this was George from the Watch Rich Rebuilds channel that sent us a copy, a sample of a rodent spray. It's called Electro Wash.
Other one here. This might be it.
There was
Mouse
Electro and
Out.
Mouse Out. Yeah, this is the one. Protective coating, Mouse Out, rodent and rust prevention spray is what this was called. This came highly recommended to us. One of our listeners sent us this as a copy, as a sample to look at, and they said it worked very, very well for them.
Mm-hmm.
So something like this might help you as well.
So, we used to think that it was a certain soy type insulation on the wiring,
Right.
That was attracting rodents. And but you just fixed the Roadster from Florida that had some rodent damage.
Yeah, and the steering rack, the gator that basically goes from the end of the steering rack out to the tie rod. We noticed that there was where the mouse had started to chew through that.
Yeah, and it happened to be on the very top. And of course, you get water down in there and starts compromising a vital component in your car in the steering rack.
That's right. Highlanders joined us with another comment. Bilstein, Ohio, he said, sorry if I sound rude. I'm just a very detailed tech. P.S. Say it, team.
Kindness is free.
Always
Yeah.
free. Yes.
This is one of our listeners. So I've got another question for you here. We found this in a Tesla Roadster, and you might want to describe this. This came from another shop.
So this is basically the same version. So this would be the passenger side of a shock mount on the upper chassis, right? So this is the driver's side. And why it's a little bit different is we have to have a basket on top of the shelf because we have the ABS system that is bolted down to the 3 holes right here. It's kind of a cradle. So we had a vehicle come in that had very poor suspension and handling.
Or suspension, Mike. It was a dump truck. It's the one that I test drove before we did any suspension work.
Yep.
And literally, you'd be driving down the street, and suddenly you'd hear a loud thud, and the car would kind of rock. And I think what you later discovered was there wasn't any travel there,
Yep.
and it was hitting the firewall.
Yeah, so we had a few issues with that. We also had on the suspension that was installed, the helper springs were collapsed. So they decided to take a Lotus shock, from my understanding, and adapt it to these cradles or the shock upper mounts. And they kind of, I guess, just took a welding class and started
They were practicing. Yeah.
practicing on this piece.
And one part even broke loose after they welded it.
Yeah, we've had a piece right here that was, just kind of removed from it. I guess no heat penetration or anything in it, so it just kind of sat on top until opportune time.
Mm-hmm. So these are the kinds of things we deal with, folks, and that's why it's important to pick your shops correctly. This was definitely kludged, and of course, a safety issue. This is suspension. This is what holds the wheel onto the car, basically.
Yeah, that one's a mess, and the holes on that one are very ovaled as well. I noticed.
Yep.
So you were telling us about a tool. Is this part of that?
So this is actually a representation of dampening. So you have your clicker inside here, and you have the dampening rod that's within the side. So this is just kind of a show and tell. I just took a threaded rod just to kind of demonstrate what the dampening rod is. So on the inside of a shock, we have we'll call this bigger washer here, the piston, and there's a couple holes drilled in there. And so that's where the fluid inside the shock will go top and bottom for the movement of the shock. So when we want to make adjustments to that, we take various shims of different thicknesses and we stack them on top, different diameters. And what that does is it controls the flow that goes through the piston. So that combined with the shock oil, it allows us to have that smooth travel up and down.
Oh.
So if we have a shock that comes in and they're having, say it's too soft of a ride, we can make a few clicks on our coilovers, and then basically that'll kind of externally change a little bit of the shim pack, and then it slows down the oil so it kind of stiffens up the ride a little bit. And then if we want to go further and make a custom set for a customer, or if we're doing motorsports applications, we can actually remove the shim stack and replace the shims that we put on top and below the piston to fine tune the suspension for that. Because I find that a lot of European, for motorcycles or high-end motorsports, a lot of European suspensions that we used in McLarens and motorcycle world, they base it off European tracks, and it's really smooth over there because they don't have NASCAR and really heavy vehicles beating the track down all the time. So it's a little bit more sensitive. So when we bring that stuff over here, sometimes we'll go in and we'll adjust the stacks on them to kind of put up on the racetracks that have that NASCAR kind of beating up the corners, causing potholes. Because it's all about having control and putting the power to the ground, putting the steering to the ground, and if you don't have that control, you're all over the place.
So we've also said this often. Our shocks, by the way, they come with an instruction sheet, and it is laminated, and we also get tools with it so that you can actually dial in the performance of the shock, depending if you're going to go street or track.
Yes.
Tell us maybe a bit about the type of adjustments that you would do if you're a weekend warrior, you want to track it and then go back to driving your car during the week.
So the biggest adjustments is when you start with these, and this is what we do in the shop, we always click these all the way in so it's fully closed. And we know that there's going to be 50 adjustments out. So basically fully closed is going to be the stiffest if it's going to be. You don't want to always have it on fully locked out, but usually 1 or 2 clicks out, like the Roadster you were driving. And then you can go all the way out. So from track would be a good setting from like 0 to 10 from fully closed. And then the softer you go out. So it's kind of like ride comfort. If you like kind of a nice kind of ride, I'd probably put it maybe 35 to 40 clicks. And then you can also adjust front to rear to see, your steering input. So like you can balance out the car and make sure you have a neutral handling car without any oversteer or understeer by adjusting springs and adjusting the actually dampening rod or the adjuster.
Okay. All right. And, as we've often said, a shock set like this, you don't have to ship your car cross country to get it installed by a Roadster shop like us.
Right.
You find a good suspension shop in your area with the kind of information that we supply with these shocks, the 2 laminate sheets that give the various dialing in processes. They're going to be quite competent to be able to give you a good installation for these shocks.
Most definitely.
The other, just really quick for what Pete was giving to you. When we did the redesign on the top, we specifically went that direction, so we didn't have a left and a right. So when you buy these from us directly, it's easier for you to install. You don't have to worry about putting the shock on the wrong side of the car, having to redo it. So that was one of the key factors that went into designing it to go that way.
And I don't recall the outcome of this, but since these are the upgraded version shocks for the Tesla Roadster, and the base version did not have this gas canister, are the mounting holes on the base version Roadsters available so that these shocks will fit without any modification?
So we have to modify putting them on a base. So any of the sport models come with a canister from Bilstein, so they can easily swap over. If you have a base model, it's just 2 holes that we put in some time certs and then some screws in there, and then it holds the same clamp. So it's pretty easy to be upgraded into that chassis. The passenger side is the side you have to add to. Driver side, I have found most of them have the holes already inside where they would normally mount, and there's usually like a little sticker over the top. We pull that sticker off, and then the holes are there.
Okay, perfect. And for those of you that aren't sure whether you have bad shocks or not, let me describe something to you. Shocks decay so gradually, it's such a subtle change, you're probably not aware of it. And once we put new shocks in and the suspension is fixed, people are always amazed and go, oh my God, this is what it was like when it was new, but I forgot. Because I've been living with this bone-jarring, teeth-rattling experience for so long. Some of the things that you can look at in your shocks is there's a bump stop there, and those are sometimes pretty compromised. They're flattened out, they're crumbling. I'm not sure what the material is, but it's a latex type rubber material, and it doesn't age well. So, and then of course look for leaking shocks. You're going to see some wetness there. And those are the indications typically. Bone jarring, dump truck ride, and then look at the shocks themselves. And the final thing is look at your odometer. These things aren't going to last forever.
Right. YouTube, Broman's follow-up comment. He says, thank you guys. Love the show. So thank you, Bromans.
YouTube Highlander, he says, mouse out, good to know for electrical panels.
Yes.
Okay.
Rick on TikTok asks, where is Gruber?
Well, I'm right here. Okay. We are in Phoenix, Arizona, Rick. We are at 203 West Lone Cactus up in North Phoenix, just south of the Deer Valley Air Park. And we get visitors almost every day that take tours. If you're ever in Phoenix or in the neighborhood, please stop by, and I'll personally come over and take time out of my day to give you a personalized tour of the auto shop of the future.
You guys have tours, several a week. I think you're taking people.
Yep, daily actually.
It's daily at this point. Yeah.
And then they say, Highlander says, I wonder who is stamping those parts out. Well, that's a good question. Parts like this are very easy for us to replicate because we have a full-blown machine shop here at the Gruber companies. And our ace mechanic there is already working on recreating these.
Yep.
And we, of course, when we recreate, we always improve. We make them better, thicker, faster, and in most cases, even less expensive at times because we're the source of the product.
Right. One other comment from Highlander. He says, as always, extremely informative. Gruber is my best source for hands-on info.
Well, thank you. Is there anything else, Mike, that you might want to share with our audience? And yeah, bear in mind, these are just the folks that showed up. These things get posted out on YouTube, and it's out there for posterity. So people will be watching this live podcast on YouTube.
My biggest thing is just, keep an eye on your suspension and, make sure you take care of the maintenance on it. It is controlling your vehicle. Your steering also are two things that you need to survive on our roadways. And, keep in mind, if you do have a blown shock, the sooner you get to it, the less damage you can incur on the rest of the suspension. We've seen some cars come in, the bushings are wiped out, the ball joints are wiped out. And so it just means you got to go further into the suspension to bring it back up to where it should be. So just kind of keep that in mind. Once a week, or if you don't drive your car much, once a month, just kind of walk around, check your tire pressures, and make sure your tires are in good shape, especially if you're here in Arizona. We have the extreme heat.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, just kind of look through and kind of make sure your shocks aren't leaking. Or if you see any fluid on your wheel, that's a good sign to have it looked at, because it could be either the brake system or it could be the shock leak.
Mike, well, thank you for joining us. It's
Thank
been
you
a
for
pleasure.
having me.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mike.
You can take that back with you if you want. Actually, yeah, Ramiro's been looking for that spare shock because he's got one set that's missing one.
Mark, you want to go ahead and mute that?
All right, excellent. Well, continuing here, we've got something else to show you here in a second, but in the meantime, Instagram, Mr. Ashraf says, hi, welcome, thank you for joining us, and let us know where you're coming in from. I mean, yesterday we had people from all over the world. There were many countries represented.
Oh, yeah, we had Asia, we had Europe, we had
Eastern Europe,
Poland,
UK,
Morocco in Africa,
Ireland.
Ireland. So we love hearing where you guys are coming from.
So I've got something else to show you, and I don't know if my cord's going to reach here. I'm going to take this off, put it back on.
Yeah, that's this is an exciting part that Pete has coming up right now. Just a piece of beauty, in my opinion.
So what we have here is not even going to fit on the table. This is some of the things that the Roadster owners like to improve their cars with. This is a complete carbon fiber dash. So you may have the leather dash, you may have the standard plastic dash, but this replaces all of that. And what I wanted to show you was just the craftsmanship that our vendors are able to achieve with parts like this. Now, you would expect the visible top portion to be nice and shiny and glossy. Okay. Then, if you take a look at the back portion, I'm going to get closer to my microphone, you can see that even the back portion is shiny and glossy and extraordinarily well built. This is the kind of craftsmanship that comes from the vendors that we have selected for this. And this is not the type of part that does well being built in a small shop. The vendors and sources we have for this are typically large shops that do a number of other things and for other car brands. This particular one does McLaren, Lamborghini, and Ferrari. So it kind of gives you an idea of what kind of quality goes into this, because these are very discerning clients. But anyway, this is out on our e-store for any of you interested, along with a bunch of other carbon fiber parts. And take a look and see if there's something that you think will make your put some bling in your Roadster.
Thank you, Pete. That's that carbon fiber dash is just a piece of artwork, in my opinion.
Yep, there are definitely craftsmen in our business, in our vendor pool. My computer went dead, so I'm going to turn it over to you for a second.
Okay. We wanted to talk a little bit about the 80E days. Raphael, and he had a message out on Instagram. It says our Tesla Roadster is still stuck in Seattle. Now, Raphael Demestri is on the process of taking a personal trip around the world, kind of scoping out the route for the 80E days trip that they're going to be taking in November of 2024. On his Instagram, he actually said, if you have the opportunity to help push the electric car to transportation companies, please get in touch. So we're gonna check with our own import and export vendors and some of the people that we worked with in the past for getting cars through customs and into the U.S. Hopefully, we'll be able to help out, and we'll reach out to Raphael when that happens.
And it's actually very timely because we are currently expecting the 3 Chinese Roadsters. They are off the coast of California right now. They are getting ready to unload at Long Beach. It may be as soon as Friday this week, so in a couple of days. And there was a very competent broker involved in that entire process. So we're going to look up that broker and see if we can get him hooked up with Raphael, because Raphael is going to go the opposite direction. Now, there's a novel idea. The cars came here. They've got some empty spaces. Maybe they can put Raphael's car instead of those 3 Chinese Roadsters and go back that way.
Yeah, there we go. We know that we have containers that are exactly the right size for a Tesla Roadster.
Totally, yes. And by the way, the update on those is if they arrive Friday, which is possible, but more than likely next week, they will be 3 sea containers will be unloaded at Gruber Motor Company, and we will have the second unveiling of the 3 barn-find Roadsters. YouTube, Highlander is joining us again. He says, talk to my cousin in Australia. Your live show is at 3 a.m. for them. Wow, so we've got a dedicated audience when the Australians show up, huh?
Yes, we do. You know, Highlander, that's one of the things that we had to really think about when we set our showtime. As we were starting the show at the beginning of the year, we experimented with a couple different times and found that afternoon here in the U.S. would be ideal. For the Eastern Seaboard, it'd be evening. But then for all of our audience in Europe, we were between 1 a.m. and about 4 a.m. And then of course, the Australian and Far East Asian, it was 7 o'clock in the morning the following day. But we found that our audience is so much more Europe-centered already that moving it back 6 hours, which unfortunately made it much earlier in the morning for the Australian people, actually worked very well for the European.
So we've got another image, Jesse. If we can pop this one up, it is the Celeb Roadster image. And I wanted to show you that on our website, under the Census program, where we collect all of the Roadsters that the owners will notify us and tell us what VIN they have, where they're located, what the disposition of the car is. And we originally started this Census program to help Tesla decide how many of these things are left out there, because no one really knew. And of course, that gets dangerous, because if Tesla thinks there aren't very many left, they may not continue to provide parts, support, 3.0 ESS packs, all of the important stuff to keep the cars running. And I think that over the last couple of years, we have proved that there is a huge audience out there and a huge owner base, and much larger than I think anybody had anticipated. If you're curious, go to Gruber Motors. There's a little Census icon in the upper right-hand corner, and that will take you to all of the Roadsters sorted by VIN. And there is a sort field, so if you're curious how many brilliant yellow Roadsters are left and which ones are collision damaged now or no longer in existence, you can search on this little field in 2 sections and get all that information.
Yes.
If you're curious how many are in Eastern Europe or in Australia, all of that's available on that Census program, and it's all voluntary. We depend on the community, the Roadster community, to email us information about their car, and it then gets posted, and you guys are out there on the Census program. But anyway, this picture that we have up here, we began to collect the celebrity-owned Roadsters, either current or previous. Most of these are previous, by the way. And as you can see, there are a number of them. Signature cars. We just recently posted Dustin Hoffman's car, which is in our service center. VIN 133. It's now in. It is in second ownership, and it will be available for sale soon. So those of you looking for a highly collectible car, that would be one to keep an eye on. It's not quite ready yet to get posted.
In fact, I think one of the newest entries to this particular list is down near the bottom of the list there. It says production 699 VIN number going to JB Strobel.
Yeah, now let's talk about that for a moment. JB has 2 Roadsters. One of them was a evaluation prototype, VIN number 5, which Tesla was not going to release because it really went through some rough testing. It was the vibration test car. But because the staff there liked JB so much, this is how the story goes, by the way, they decided to put this car together for him, and they gave it to him as a gift. And
How cool.
I've talked to JB about this car. It also sports the first ESS battery pack. And as of about a year and a half ago, it was still functioning. I don't know what its current state is. Maybe it's still running.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
Wow.
But he also has VIN number 4, which was a validation prototype, and most recently got VIN number 699. Now, the way that happened, this was JB's dad's car, which came in for repair about 9 months ago or so, and it got bricked. It was stored on an island off of the coast of Lake Michigan. It took a ferry. It took forever to get it here because of the ferry issue, the coordination and the loading and unloading and all that, especially when they're bricked because the wheels are typically locked on those.
Right.
But we fixed the car. We got it running again. We found a resistive cell, and it was. And then we did some improvements on the car, a number of them actually. The car actually got wrapped to the color of the customer's choice. And then at the 11th hour, JB's dad decided, you know what? I think I'm going to keep this in the family rather than sell it, because he had pondered selling it. And JB is the one that piped up and said, I'll take it, Dad. So it's going to go to JB's house at this point, and JB ends up with 3 Roadsters.
I think that's such a wonderful story there. Now, this is the one that we had, the only Roadster with the radio antenna at some point, correct?
That was it, yes. And the reason for the radio antenna was JB's dad enjoyed a certain radio station that wasn't coming in that well on the island, and so he had an antenna mounted on the rear deck lid. And as far as we know, it was the only Roadster that ever had an antenna mounted on it.
Right. And so we went ahead and repaired that, took the antenna off and repaired that at his request. And just another little tidbit that adds interest to the story, I thought.
And I'm sure it's going to add to its collectability as well. But yeah, as you can see there, we've got a number of notable people here that own Roadsters. If anyone out there can help us with this one, it's alleged that Arnold Schwarzenegger had a Roadster. It was a production Roadster, so not a signature car that we know of anyway. If anyone knows what that VIN is, please let us know. All right, YouTube, Highlander, he said, I listened to yesterday's show, and I can't understand why my Kiwi cousin accent too thick, maybe because they talk to so many sheep, LOL.
And I have to admit, I saw Richard over there editing this comment.
Yeah.
Because I think he wrote it, if we had read it exactly as written, it would have had a lot of that Kiwi type accent in it.
Oh, gotcha.
Accent in it.
Right.
Nolver53 on YouTube has joined us this morning. Good morning. It says, I watched a YouTube short in which you showed a product on your website that relocates the 12 volt to the trunk area. Well, where was it prior, and what's the benefit?
Okay, good story there. The 1.5 Roadsters, which are VINs 1 to 500, did not have a 12-volt battery. Now, the reason you need a 12-volt battery in a car is because many of the components and devices in the car don't operate off the 400-volt battery. They're not 400-volt devices.
Right.
And you'd probably kill your mechanics if you were floating 400 volts around to headlights and door switches and, some of the other things that require voltage to function. So what Tesla did was they were drawing 12 volts off of one of the sheets one of the battery sheets in the 1.5 type Roadsters. The problem with that was it was causing premature failure on that sheet because it was working so much harder than the rest of the sheets.
Sure.
So by the time they went to the 2.0 Roadster, which was an upgrade in a number of areas, instead of a stick shift, you had push buttons now. Different trim on the front, for example. So instead of not having a battery, they said, we should really insert a 12-volt battery here somewhere and put a DC to DC converter in the main battery area to convert 400 volts to 12 volts to keep the 12-volt battery charged. But because they've used up all the space in the Roadster, the only place that they could find to put it was underneath the passenger headlight inside the fender, which now required you to change a battery because, remember, batteries don't last forever. Every 2-3 years or so, you have to change them. And this was a little motorcycle battery, a YTX9B. You had to take off the fender liner. You had to dig inside that fender. And if you had that done at a service center, it was about $500 or $600 to get that battery swapped out, plus the cost of the battery, of course.
And still is.
Yeah. So what we did years ago was we said, there's a more elegant way to do this. Why don't we put a battery relocation kit together and put it in a trunk with a meter on it so it tells you when it's about to go out? And now we've changed that $500 to $600 battery swap at the service center to a $40 battery swap that you can do yourself within 5 minutes by opening that lid and replacing that battery. The other thing that we did was, rather than use a motorcycle battery, which is really a starter battery designed to crank and then, start up an engine,
Right.
we use the same batteries we use in critical power, which are designed for electronic applications. And plus, we added another 4 amp hours because the footprint of our 12-volt, 12-amp-hour battery is about the same as this motorcycle battery, which is only 8 amp hours. Now, what that means is you've got more power, you've got more energy. So for those of you that like to listen to rap music and crank up your woofer in that car, this is going to give you the punch you need to get the right amount of music, low-frequency music in your car. All right, TikTok. Stan Demand says, have you guys ever come across battery life getting greatly reduced after an over-the-air update? Yes, that is a huge contention that is currently creating a lot of discussion. There's a Facebook site, if you're interested in seeing some firsthand examples of this. It's out on Facebook, and BMS_029 is part of what's in that. And I never do get that Facebook name right.
I think it's the BMS-U_029 Facebook group, and it's run by Ray
Ray Johnson.
Johnson.
Yeah,
is the gentleman that runs that group. It's an error that is occurring often enough that Ray Johnson has put together a community of people that are experiencing this error, are saying what kind of things can be done to resolve this error, and actually providing tips and support to one another of what people are learning from their experience.
Mm-hmm. And the suspicion is that what's happening is with the over-the-air updates, learning how to handle the batteries better, they may be tightening up the parameters on that battery, and now suddenly you have this unintended consequence, which is that your battery now doesn't have the range that it used to have because the firmware won't allow a charge to that level anymore.
That's right. Another one of the theories or rumors that are out there is that there is a battery gauge, that tests the battery, or is supposed to test the battery on a regular basis, but had not been testing the battery for some time, possibly months or even years. And the over-the-air software update re-enables or resets that test monitor flag, and then the test comes in and the battery comes back and fails that test.
Okay.
That's another theory that the group has as a working theory.
And then, of course, the final group that weighs in on this are the conspiracy theorists that feel that this is an intentional strategy by Tesla to make sure that that battery has failed after the warranty expires, so that Tesla is not on the hook for that $20,000 replacement.
Yeah, that's definitely a conspiracy theory that's out there. It's not one that I subscribe to at all.
Or that any of us support. No.
Well, we did just see what happened with Apple, though. Keep that in mind.
All right. It looks like Jesse's weighing in. Did we see that? What happened with what?
With Apple and their iPhones.
Okay, we're not hearing you, Jesse.
Oh, it's still not coming through?
Correct, yeah.
You might check to see if your line is still muted. We were doing some sound checks early on before
Rick,
the...
it's registering in OBS here. Give me 1 sec.
Okay.
All right. Jesse is the guy that is running the keyboard over there with all of the switches and camera switching and audio levels and, if that stuff made music, he would be a musician.
He is the magic man, yes.
So, yeah, I think there's an issue.
You're dead on this end, yeah.
So he's thinking that the issue is internally, not with the audience. So it's just us that can't hear him, not the audience.
Okay.
Oh, okay. All right.
What Jesse was saying, did you hear about what happened with Apple?
Well, tell us, Jesse.
Yeah, no, I had not heard.
I can hear you audibly, the
Can you,
audience, if they... Yeah,
you guys
okay,
should
we
be
hear
able-
you now. Yeah.
Is there a hiss at all in this one?
Oh,
Nope, not
Sounds
at
good.
all.
Okay, well, I was just saying briefly that, hold on, let me put my glasses on real quick, that Apple just had that massive lawsuit about the same thing. I think I was telling you about that, Pete,
Mm-hmm.
where basically they settled a massive class action lawsuit for, I think, $500 million plus, so they didn't have to go to court for them using their over-the-air updates to lower the battery life and do things to their phones that would entice people to have to upgrade to a new phone.
Wow.
So it is a conspiracy theory, but it is actually a real thing that has precedent in the
There's some
past.
precedent.
I remember reading something about that, and it was that they were the operating system software in the phone was taking and reading the version of the telephone that you had, and if it was an iPhone that was too old, it was purposely slowing down the functionality of that phone so it would make somebody dissatisfied with the phone and want to upgrade to a new phone.
Amazing. What a
Now,
slippery-
obviously, that's theory, and I don't think any of that was proven. That's why they did the settlement. But I mean, if they're willing to settle for $500 million or whatever it was, there might have been something to it, you know.
Well, the fact that they slow it down as the devices get older, that was well documented, and they admitted to it. But they said that the reason for it was for safety,
Mhm.
right?
Okay.
I mean, I'm not buying that, and I think that that's what this whole settlement was about. Was they're being accused of doing it on purpose for what Jesse said, the sole purpose of having people buy another one. But I don't know if they actually came out and admitted it.
Well, it's a slippery slope. Message to manufacturers, don't do it.
Definitely.
YouTube, Lito, Idaho says, hello, guys. Welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, Lito. And then on Highlander on YouTube says battery location. He said, my Chrysler Sebring convertible.
Okay.
I'd love to hear more about that particular one. Says, oh, okay. Oh boy. PS View, I'm gonna have to start sending you the bagels and donuts for Jesse.
And that's usually only Sundays when he's looking for any kind of promos or gimmies like that.
Crawlers.
Crawlers, French crawlers, yeah.
Well, Monday through Friday is good for the rest of us too.
Okay. Do you know if you take, in fact, you taught me that. You take those French crullers, and sometimes they've been sitting on a shelf, and, there's a lot of fat in there, so it's kind of crumbly a bit, it doesn't taste quite as good. Pop those in the microwave for 7 seconds, and they become gooey, doughy, and chewy, and they are marvelous.
Oh, that
It's
sounds so
perfect.
good.
And they're so light, you can pack away a dozen of them without even blinking,
Well, yeah, they're light until they've sat in their digestive system for a half hour. Lato, Idaho, a follow-up on the Apple phone. It says they were throttling down their batteries. And then he goes on to say, Apple fanboys will believe anything.
Wow. Okay.
So Highlander on YouTube says, you guys do lag on audio when we text you.
Okay.
So that's good to know.
And YouTube, Lito Idaho says, how's the water situation in Phoenix? Boy, it's dry. We don't get much rain. And unlike where I lived back east, when you'd go out when it was sunshine, here we go out when it's raining and go, oh my God, our plants are going to love this.
Oh yeah, everybody comes out to look at the rain. I know that there's been a lot in the press about Phoenix and not being able to build buildings because they don't have any water left and so on and so forth. The reality is, for everybody who's here, we have plenty of water. The prices are going up over time because it's getting more expensive to bring the water in from the Colorado River. But there hasn't been any need for shortages or no rationing, like none of the California style stuff. Anyone who wants to have a lawn is still allowed to have a lawn. But we try to do our best to conserve.
So since this is the Roadster podcast, I'm going to insert some Roadster stuff here. But first, there's an Instagram question. Irina Pavlova 7 says, Peter, what is your favorite food? It varies. Sushi was definitely one of my favorite for a number of years. And, you can do your own sushi at home. If you go to any of these high-end fish markets, don't buy the Costco, frozen fish and thawed or anything like it. Has to be fresh, completely fresh, because you're going to eat it raw, right?
Oh, yes.
But sushi. Then we've got some killer Mexican restaurants here, and it's not usually the chain restaurants, it's the taco stands or the ones in South Phoenix,
yeah.
Or the Ibira tacos, as they call it, and just exquisite food, as you would expect in any kind of a city where you have a lot of ethnicity. You tend to have these delicatessens, although they're going away rapidly with mass chains. And that's usually where the gifts are. There's a one in town here. There's an Italian store for those of you that live in Phoenix called Romanelli's on Dunlap and 35th Avenue. They've been in business for 40 years. They make Italian sausage right there on the premises, import all their cheeses and their sausages from Italy, and they make salads there and submarines, and you can get cooked sausage there as well. But they're so good that the big chains actually buy their Italian sausage, both hot and sweet.
Oh, wow.
Definitely worth going to. And it's the instant you walk in, I love taking my grandkids in there to acquaint them with what it used to be like. The odors hit you immediately, the goat's milk cheeses and, the spices.
Oh, yes.
And but anyway, what kind of food? It does change. And I do change my preferences from time to time. YouTube Highlander says the battery on his Sebring was under the passenger left wheel. It took me forever to find it. My ACR Viper was the same way. They buried that battery in the passenger quarter panel in the rear, and it took forever to get to it. And of course, it was probably an afterthought, like it usually is with those niche type cars where, the important stuff gets taken care of first. Engine, blower, turbo, that type of thing. All right.
On Instagram, Bayraxi 9094, 2 cups of Java and a wave.
Is that what that is? Java cups. Okay, I see it now. Yes. I would not have known that. I would have said it was Casper the Ghost or something like that. But I'm not an emoji expert. If you guys want to trick me, throw some emojis up there, and I'll give you the weirdest definitions for those.
Yes. And then Gem Sent on TikTok says, I recall that. Laughing emoji, it was about Apple. It also says it's good to have a varied diet.
Yeah, that's
very
true.
Very much.
All right.
And on Irina Pavlova on Instagram, thumbs up, basically saying thank you for the response.
Oh, you're more than welcome. So getting back to the Tesla Roadster podcast now. One thing I wanted to cover with everyone is, what do you do when your Tesla Roadster gets bricked? Bricked means that it had a lack of charge, and it could be as short as a month and a half or 2 months, and it reaches a state, only the Tesla Roadsters, where it will no longer accept a charge from the charge port door. Well, there are no options for you at your house to reverse this. These cars typically have to come to us, and what we do is we're able to trickle them back and then repair any damage that may have occurred if it was longer than a couple of months or so. But there's some very specific steps that you have to follow. The first rule is time is not on your side. You can take it to a Tesla service center, and they'll certainly look at it when they get to it,
Mhm.
And then when they do, the prognosis with a bad battery is it's going to have to get replaced. And these days, it's $35,000. We're going to talk about that later because the price has gone up a bit, it looks like. Occasionally, a service center may attempt a recovery, like up in Toronto about 3 months ago or so. They were actually willing to do a recovery on that Roadster, but it turns out the string voltage was too low for them to tackle.
Correct. And now they're not the only service center that will do this level 1 battery recovery anymore. If I remember right, didn't you say there are 2 or 3 service centers that we've repaired their level 1 battery recovery hardware, rebuilt it, sent it back to them, and they're willing to do that?
Yes, and I don't have a list yet which service centers have those and are willing or capable of doing a recovery. But the long and short of it is, time's not on your side. If you want to do the Tesla route, it may delay things a bit and it may damage your Roadster further or the battery.
Mm-hmm.
Because what you need to do next is put it in tow mode while you still have your 12-volt support. That means the little screen there. And the reason you do that is now the wheels are free rolling. Otherwise, your rear wheels are locked, and we're trying to get one right now out of Canada, actually.
Mm-hmm.
It's a nightmare because it's on a lift. The wheels are locked. Well, how are you going to get it off the lift, right? And then when you get it on the ground, you have to get dollies on it, and then you have to drag it.
Mm-hmm.
The worst one we had was we got dollies for the car. It was in Manhattan Beach, California, but they had a river rock driveway. Well, these wheels are about, 2 inches in diameter, and they don't like going over all of that river rock.
Oh, yes.
But you're going to have dollies at that point, and the transporters charge a lot more if they have to winch that car up on their transporter. The other thing that it prevents the transporter from doing is juggling multiple cars, because as they're delivering that car, they may have many stops along the way, and they may need to take your car off.
Mm-hmm.
In that scenario, you're going to have to wait much longer because you're going to have to find somebody that already has a full load and is going to go point A to point B.
Mm-hmm.
Or vice versa, is going to put your car in first, and then it takes much longer to get to your house or to us. So make sure that you put it in tow mode. And any of you that need help with that, please call us. We'll walk you through the process. The third step, which is absolutely vital, you can literally put that large $30,000 battery pack into a coma, put it to sleep, by pulling what's called a service plug, which is underneath the driver's side rear quarter panel. It's difficult to see and to get to, but by pulling out that service plug, you have now put that, you have disconnected all of the various loads in the car that may be demanding power from that battery, which is already compromised. Now the car goes into a coma, it goes to sleep, and now you have months worth of time.
Right.
Plenty of time to get the car to us so that we can put it back on the road.
Yeah, just a reminder for the non-Roadster owners out there, any electric vehicle that's not a Roadster pretty much is going to have an automatic disconnect. Whenever that car shuts down, that high voltage battery will automatically disconnect, and that's largely designed because of what people, not just Tesla, learned from the Roadster, where it did not have that automatic disconnect, and you have to go in and manually pull the service plug.
Right. So, yeah, it's only the Roadster in the Tesla lineup that has this problem, because that's usually the next question we're asked. Well, I was thinking about buying a Tesla, but I don't think I will now because I don't want to run the risk of having that happen to the car.
Correct. Yeah, the Model S, Model 3, Model Y, Model X, not a problem with any of those.
Highlander asks a good question on YouTube. He says, on topic, what's the Roadster's greatest strength and weakness? Well, I'm glad you asked. The first thing you do with a Tesla Roadster is take off your hard top, take off the soft top, make it a convertible. Jump in that car and just do some 0 to 60 blasts with that car. It is like an amusement park on wheels. And if you're into music, blast some music. All the road noise and rattles and, the things that come with an older Roadster will evaporate and disappear by the time you play some AC/DC. It'll sound like part of the drum beat, But its greatest strength and weakness, the greatest strength is, unlike the rest of the Tesla lineup, it's the most exciting car there. Look at the colors alone. They're brightly colored. They're sports cars. It's a two-seater. And it is, although it's not as fast as a Plaid, in a two-seater convertible like that, it feels fast. It feels faster than that grocery getter sedan that may do a 2-second blast, but you've got all of this luxury wrapped around you. In that two-seater, you're going to feel the speed much better, in my opinion.
Oh, I think you will as well. Part of it's that you're only sitting, 3 or 4 inches off the ground after you're on your seat, after the cushioning from the seat is taken into account. Which leads to me one of the greatest weaknesses, and it's the reason that I typically don't get into the Roadsters. I can't get out.
Right. There's a
I'm a tall, big guy, and for me to get out of the Roadster here in Phoenix in the summertime, I'm going to burn my hands because I'm going to have to shimmy myself out, sit on the ground, possibly lay on the ground and roll over in order to get out.
So you probably saw that video of the older Lamborghini guy that finally got the car of his dreams, a Lamborghini in his late 70s. He was able to get in the car, right? But on the way out, he actually did that very thing you described. He had to roll on the ground. He was laughing all the way, of course.
Oh, yeah, of course.
A lot of fun.
Pete,
So, yeah.
that's why I think it might be hard to believe that Arnold Schwarzenegger had one. Because I think he's like 6'3",
he's
260 pounds, isn't he?
Oh, no, he's short.
Are you sure about that?
Yeah.
He's only about 5'10" or 5'11" tall, but he's a big guy, but he's
So,
not very
but
tall.
Almost Tom Cruise short. Is
But
what
with
I've heard.
with those muscles, I still don't think he would fit in there. Back in his heyday, at least.
Well, I have muscles and I fit in there just fine. All right, moving right along here. The other part of Highlander's question, we got the strengths out of the way. What are the weaknesses? Well, there's an existential threat, which we do have to discuss. So much of the Tesla Roadster now, going on 15 years, are electronics that are becoming obsolete. We have a hard time finding transistors, finding chips, and the future of the car is dependent on someone like us, passionate and dedicated to the preservation of Roadster, developing some alternatives to the existing electronics in the car. And it's not going to be cheap. It's going to be very expensive because you're basically starting fresh. You're making things in small quantity, and the customer base is tiny compared to other cars, of course. You've got about, just under 2,000 Tesla Roadster owners out there with cars.
Yeah, well, for example, one of the things I learned from our lead engineer when it comes to these capacitors, these IGBTs that you put onto the PEM, you could have the same IGBT with the same microfarads, with the same everything on the top line specs, and it still blow up the car every time, because the nature of the IGBT and the speed at which it can respond to the electrical inrush might be different than what the original one was.
Well, what's happening there is these parts, these components, are improved as time goes on. Better performance, better specs. The problem is you can't put those into an existing circuit board that has all the bias resistors set up for that old performing part.
There you go.
And the timing function set up. So that's the problem. Even though there are better parts available, it's kind of like the Roadster battery, if you remember. That's part of the reason that we don't have anything but a 3.0 pack at this point. There's much better technology out there, but the firmware, the geometry is all dependent on certain parameters.
Yeah.
And you have to meet that in order to have a successful product.
Yeah, so great points.
All right, TikTok, user 604. Good question. Are the Roadsters from China getting close? Yes, we just got an update yesterday, Jesse and I. They are off the coast of Long Beach, California right now on a ship, 3 20-foot sea containers. We're not certain precisely what day they're going to be able to unload, but it could be as soon as Friday. The feeling right now from the broker is, who has handled this ocean-going voyage from day one, is that it will be a quick customs experience. Worst case, maybe some x-rays, and then the cars will be put onto semis and transported to Gruber Motor Company.
If it really, truly is a quick and short customs process, we're going to have to find out more information from that broker so we can start using it.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Because we've We've had very mixed results. Sometimes good, usually not. By the way, Arnold Schwarzenegger is 6'2".
You're serious? You just looked that
I
up?
just looked it up.
That's what I was saying. He's
Oh,
in his
I had
off
no
season
idea.
too. He's 260 pounds, 6'2". There's no way that dude's fitting in a Roadster.
Ah, well, his head would be sticking up over the top at 6'2".
Got to get a convertible.
Yes. Lato, Idaho has a great question. He says, can you guys explain string voltage?
Certainly. In a Tesla Roadster, you have 6,831 lithium-ion cells. There are groups of 69 cells connected in parallel, which makes up a brick. There are 99 bricks in a Tesla Roadster. There are 9 bricks per sheet and 11 sheets. And the string voltage is the cumulative voltage with a series and parallel connection. The bricks, by the way, are parallel. The bricks then themselves are connected in series in a sheet, and then the sheets are connected in series to come up with 400 volts. String voltage is the entire string, fundamentally, of 400 volts in this case. This term actually came from the critical power world where we came from.
That's right.
And string voltages are a bunch of 12-volt batteries, typically in a UPS, uninterruptible power system, that are connected in series and parallel to come up with inverter voltages, either 120-volt, 240-volt, or 480-volt.
And when you connect batteries in parallel, you're increasing the capacity of the batteries. So if you have two 12-volt, 12-amp-hour batteries that you connected in parallel, you would have one 12-volt, 24-amp-hour. If you connect them in series, the opposite occurs.
Right.
You end up with a 24-volt, 12-amp-hour battery. Doing the combination allows you to connect these. They're 2.2 amp-hour, 1.5 volt,
4 volt.
4 volt lithium-ion battery cells. And so by connecting them in that combination of parallel and serial, you're able to get it all the way up to 400 volts.
Exactly. The total kW on a traditional legacy Roadster battery pack is 53 kW. On the newer ones that use a 3.2 amp hour cell versus 2.2 is 80 kW, and that's where the nomenclature on the back of an upgraded Roadster comes from. They have an R80 decal on the back, and it's because it's 80 kW, and that's also the reason you get more range. I'm test driving one right now that just came back from Tesla. It's an R80 upgrade. In standard ideal mode, which is 80% charge, I got 224 miles this morning. It'll be 300 miles if you do a range charge.
That's incredible. That puts it up in the type of ranges that a lot of the popular electric cars are today.
Yeah. YouTube, Leto, Idaho says, coasters under each wheel? Yes, with a brick Roadster that has not been put in tow mode. And by the way, your window of opportunity to put it in tow mode is brief, because once your battery gets low enough, it shuts down the 12-volt system as well. And to get it into tow mode now requires a laptop, an external application of 12 volts, a removal of some fender liners, not anything that the average person wants to do in their home.
Correct. Asset Farmer on TikTok says, great service, reconditioning option versus new. Estimated life after reconditioning, and I think he's referring to the Roadster batteries in this case.
Oh, we've been recovering Roadster batteries that are bricked since 2014, actually. And we've had only 2 out of hundreds that have actually had another cell that went south. So what that indicates is these are aberrations. They are not end-of-life indications yet. But at some point in time, these 15-year-old batteries are going to begin to experience end of life.
Yeah.
We just don't know when yet, because we're writing the book yet on how lithium-ion multi-cell packs will last.
That's for sure. You know, we're starting to see out in the I call it out in the wild, out in the real world, battery manufacturers are starting to change their estimates. What used to be a 10-year battery is now turning into a 15 to 20-year battery.
Yeah.
And
I think you're talking about the Powerwall, where Tesla is now claiming that those are good for 20 to 22 years, and that's a 18650 multi-cell battery.
Even the more recent Model 3 and Model Y batteries, Tesla is now claiming that they're good for 15 to 20 years, and there are independent articles that are starting to come out to give those longer ranges as well.
Amazing. We're learning. as we go.
We're just learning over time. So another comment from Lito says, I can visualize a system that clamps onto each wheel and would have one free wheel that bears the load of the car.
Wow, a balancing trick, but yeah, that would be pretty cool.
That is very interesting.
Can the seats, Lido Idaho is also asking, can the seats in the Roadsters rotate? No. There are very few cabin comforts in the Roadster. Remember, this was a Lotus lease that was supposed to be easily and conveniently converted to electric car, and none of that was true. It was a production nightmare for Tesla. It was only through Elon's tenacity and perseverance that the Roadster exists. I think any other businessman would have walked away from it and said, I don't want to go through bankruptcy. This is not worth the hassle.
Yeah.
Especially considering that, he had other successful businesses. Elon has, including SpaceX at the time. So, it does not have too many creature comforts, but I'm telling you, it is a blast to drive that little sports car. It reminds me very much of my Ferrari 308 that I had for 23 years. Little two-seater, just an enormous amount of fun.
By all means. Highlander, comment to Lido, says, coasters, awesome idea. We use it to move large machinery. P.S. He says, I learned the hard way about regen on vehicles when I pushed a regen shop buggy I was supposed to fix. Hard lesson learned.
Interesting. Okay.
Oh yeah. Well, if you you were talking about a couple different times the T0 going up to the top of Pikes Peak, charging the battery, then the engineers realizing we just made an oops.
It was a serious oversight, yes. They were going to boil the batteries on the way down Pikes Peak as that regen ran 100% of the time all the way down.
Yeah, so didn't they end up driving that around the parking lot for like 3 hours?
2.5 to 3 hours driving the parking lot, trying to shed some of that energy so they could get back down the mountain.
That's funny. That's so. Gem sent on TikTok says 5'11" is short. 5'8", I must be a pygmy.
Yeah. And the sum of the bricks in series is their string voltage. The sum of the bricks and the sheets in series is the final 400-volt string voltage, or the total cumulative voltage. Now remember, the first 69 cells in a brick are connected in parallel, so the brick voltage is going to be 4 volts rather than 4 times 69.
Right.
And I was going to do that in my head, but I'm glad I didn't have to.
Yeah, you didn't have to in that case.
I described it. All right, Instagram, Omid_Stardust. Could you please tell us about IGBT manufacturer, Infineon? I don't know who our manufacturer is at Gruber Motor Company for the Tesla Roadster IGBTs. And I can't imagine that we have only one. But what I can tell you is they're getting much, much harder to find. When things like this go out of production, what ends up happening is distributors have them in inventory. They have them on the shelf.
Yeah.
And as they begin to deplete that inventory, they begin to realize, wow, the demand for this is still there and we can't get supply. And guess what happens next? The prices go up. We had one vendor that quoted us like $30 or $40 per transistor in Eastern Europe for those transistors, which back in the day cost $1.20 or $2.40 or something like that, $2.40. But yeah, it gets pretty dicey after a while. And then what we have to do, our purchasing group is very good at this. They scour the planet to try to find some inventory.
Yeah, Logan Johnson from our purchasing group is an absolute wizard at finding things that are hard to find.
Right.
And for things that are not hard to find, finding the best price on those. He always seems to do it. And I feel pretty good about my purchasing chops anymore, and I don't hold a candle to him.
No, yeah, he works miracles, and he does tricky things like he'll take a picture of it, post that out there, and suddenly he's got a vendor.
Yeah.
Things I never thought of.
Yeah, I agree. Lido, Idaho may have an answer for Omid, where he says Industrial Control Tech, 82 to 84, Salsa Logistics, Newark, New Jersey.
Okay. YouTube, Highlander says Parts, Network Electronics Catalog. Good point, Pete. I'm sorry, Newark. That's right. Newark is one of the sources. DigiKey. We've got a bunch of them. And those are the mainstream ones, which are typically out by that time. We have to go to a whole new set that have strange names. And
Yeah.
sometimes they're in other countries, like China. We got our last batch out of China, actually. Ed Prelitz is joining us from YouTube. Thank you. Have you considered manufacturing a standby UPS unit that could be plugged into a Roadster to prevent bricking? Wow, now that's an interesting concept. That would certainly prevent a bricking Roadster from a power problem. Circuit breaker, lightning storm came through, tripped some breakers. The Roadsters don't only brick, though, from power problems. The next one that's fairly high on the priority there is when you have a problem in the electronics and the charging system no longer charges. A lot of the Roadsters come in with power electronics modules that PEMs, as they call them in a Roadster, that have not had the deferred maintenance resolved. People don't realize this is a car. It's an electric vehicle. You have deferred maintenance in those vehicles in different places than you do in an ICE vehicle. And then in an ICE vehicle, take exotic cars, for example. If you have a Ferrari, every 30,000 miles, you have to have a major engine tear down. And they change the rings and the pistons and they regrind the valves. And, it's because it's a performance car. In the EVs, you have something comparable to that, and it's component degradation. You take electrolytic capacitors, for example, large ones, 400 microfarad by 400 volt, and there are 21 of them in a power electronics module. Those have an 8-year shelf life. These cars are 15 years now.
Right.
And these are directly in the mainstream inverter high voltage power section where you have 400 volts being switched at hundreds of amps. They're critical to resolve or to replace. Then you have things like an engineering problem where the original insulating dialectric or the insulating material between the transistors and the heat sinks, which are aluminum, are degrading to the point where eventually the transistor case shorts the ground. Now you've got 400 volts that is suddenly shunting to ground at hundreds of amps. And of course, that blows the transistor. When the transistor blows, it can cause damage on the circuit board. And then you have these crazy signals going upstream and downstream to the electronics that are controlling those boards. And oftentimes you have carnage inside that power electronics module.
Well, first, you've got 400 volts at hundreds of amps going to something that's expecting 12 volts at 500 milliamps or something like that.
Right.
Secondly, the people who don't drive their Roadsters are not immune from this. And I think we've seen a little bit of that where someone will say, well, yeah, I just keep my Roadster garage. It only has, 5,000 miles or 10,000 miles on it. Actually, that could make it worse.
Yeah, it's about as much about age as it is about use.
Yeah, if you don't use your PEM at all and you don't drive your Roadster at all, those caps will dry out by themselves over time. Those IGBTs will, and in fact, they can, if not exercised every so often, they can actually dry out more quickly than if they are exercised.
Yeah. YouTube, Lito Idaho says, is it possible to get a new pack fabricated in China? Well, folks, anything is possible. It's the low production run that's going to be the problem. And those $30,000 battery packs from Tesla, I think, are going to look far more attractive price-wise than a brand new effort.
Yeah, as of right now, we don't know of anywhere in China that manufactures Roadster packs. Part of it is that there's proprietary software that is going into the Roadsters as well. Putting an R80 pack into a Roadster requires a firmware update and a PEC board replacement.
Mm-hmm. Or upgrade in this case, yeah, as well.
Yes.
All right. How much current does a Roadster require to stay alive, watt hours per day? If you feed in 120 volts into the what's called the yellow charge cable, it goes into a standard 120 volt outlet. The current draw on that is 15 amps. So it's not that much. But you have to make sure that you're not using an extension cord because those 50-foot 14-gauge extension cords cannot handle 15 amps by any stretch. They're maybe good for 5 or 7 amps.
Yes. And it's not like you're pulling 15 amps all day long every day because when the Roadster doesn't need to charge, it won't charge and it won't pull any electricity at that point.
Right. YouTube, Lito Idaho says, would WD-40 prevent this dielectric breakdown? No. What happens is it was a material that was selected back in 2008. No one knew that it was going to dry up and deteriorate and turn into paste or turn into crumbles.
Right.
And of course, now later on, in hindsight, we do realize that. There is nothing really to restore this dielectric. Oftentimes, we find that it's already crushed and it's very close to shorting out. And yeah, so what we have is a much better type material that is thicker and has a longer life expectancy that we use, and also better thermal characteristics, which is its function in life, not only to prevent the high voltage from reaching ground, but to transfer heat to the heat sinks.
You know, a couple of things I think of, WD-40, as wonderful as it is. First, you're not opening up the PEM is not a consumer activity. That's not something that you only want to do inside the shop with somebody who is experienced and professional, able to do that. Secondly, WD-40 itself is going to have conductive properties, being an oil-based product.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that would cause many more problems than it would potentially prevent.
Yeah. YouTube Highlander says, I killed the buggy's controller by pushing it locked up. We thought it was the brakes. My boss never forgave me. I understand why.
Okay.
And Highlander says, it's all changing so fast. It is definitely changing fast, but that's the fun part. If you learn to adapt and stay on top of it and embrace the change rather than feel overwhelmed by it.
You know, I wonder if the level of change that we feel like we're experiencing in life is kind of like when the perception that we have of how time passes. You and I are both middle-aged or getting closer to senior years, and we feel like time passes quickly. But if you're a child, 3 months feels like a lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's the same thing with the technological changes and stuff, because the kids that are out there, they don't know any different, and they think, it is what it is.
Yeah, they assimilate it. They have an affinity for technology. Like I've admitted many times, my granddaughter does my cell phone stuff for me.
Yeah, and my 2-year-old granddaughter, I'll watch her now. She'll open up her iPad, turn it on, swipe to the videos that she wants to watch, press them, she watches them. If she doesn't like it, she turns it off and swipes to another one and watches. And I'm thinking, my gosh, this girl is 2 years and 2 months old. She can, and she can barely talk, and yet she's watching and knows how to decide what she likes and doesn't like. And
Becoming a techno whiz, yeah.
oh, it's amazing.
All right, looks like we're going to be wrapping here shortly, but a few more questions. The YouTube Lito Ido says, my wife is Chinese, and I believe the Chinese can copy anything. Yes, they're very good at that.
I will not dispute that. They especially in recent years with what they've been doing with the automotive industry and some of the better quality parts coming out of China, I will not dispute that at all.
Instagram, Omid_Stardust, thanks a lot. What kind of electric motor is used in Tesla cars, BLDC or PMSM? It is a 3-phase AC induction motor, and it's pulse width modulated. All right, I think we're wrapping here.
Yes, I think so.
We really appreciate you joining us for this Tesla Roadster podcast. We'll be doing more of these types of guest appearances on this show, bringing in experts that can answer questions for you. If you missed the show and you're viewing it later on YouTube, feel free to email your questions to us at ev@gruber.com. For those of you that own Roadsters, this was an informative suspension-geared type discussion, and we'll be able to answer your questions later on then.
Many thanks again to Michael for coming and joining us. He's one of our newer Gruber Motors employees. I loved having him here on the show today.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, and we'll see you, if not tomorrow, next week, Wednesday.
Take care.